If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this. Truck drivers, while traveling through the night, what is the creepiest thing you've ever seen? The most scared I have ever been was going over Donner Pass one night in late April. I had checked the weather reports and the only concern was supposed to be light snow flurries at the highest elevations. CA will issue mandatory restrictions indicating you have to put chains on your tires, so I checked the CA website and no restrictions were called for. I went through the inspection station at Truckee and they were asking if we had chains on the truck but still no call to put them on. About 10 miles up the road, the sky opened up into the worst whiteout blizzard I have ever been in. I could barely see 50 feet in front of me, and there had been another truck ahead of me but I lost sight of his lights completely. I could see his tracks in the snow. I slowed down to about 20 miles per hour. Then just to make it worse, the wind was blowing and the snow was swirling in all directions and I began to experience a strange vertigo, like I was flying and tumbling in the air. I had to glue my line of sight on those tracks in front of me and hope that guy did not drive off the road. I made it. It only lasted about 30 miles and it turned to heavy rain. I told my dispatcher if I ever had to go through there again at night and any snow was forecast, I was going to shut down until daylight. Not so much creepy as pants-shittingly startling. It was like 2:30 am-ish. Middle of fucking nowhere Arizona, I think. It's been over a decade. Hadn't seen another vehicle for at least an hour. Kinda dangerous territory because that is when tiredness comes creeping in no matter how well rested you are. That lack of stimulation will make you sleepy a lot easier than you might think. I was always taught that if it was on four legs and walked in front of my truck to just brace for impact and hit it. Yay, it might tear the shit out of the tractor, but dynamiting the brakes can cause a jackknife or rollover. It's cheaper to fix a tractor than it is to fix a tractor, a trailer, and replace the destroyed cargo if you roll over. Not to mention if you roll a truck, good luck getting hired by any company worth working for. This next part may have been exaggerated by my brain, but I am not embellishing for story's sake. All of the sudden out of apparently nowhere, what seems like 100 tumbleweeds come rolling into the middle of the highway. Including a couple that seemed to be the size of a large SUV. Freaked me out. I was an owner/operator for United Van Lines, and had driven hot to unload in Santa Cruz, California. They had me loading in Las Vegas the next day, but I didn't finish unloading until 7 to 8 p.m. and I was exhausted so I parked behind a Denny's and jumped in the sleeper for a nap. I had a nightmare that woke me with a cold sweat. In the dream I was driving through a canyon late at night. There was no traffic and as I drove further up the pass it became darker and quieter, no houses, lights, or traffic. When I came around a bend there was a Toyota Corolla upside down in the middle of the road, headlights on and all four doors wide open. I stopped to see if anyone needed help but couldn't see anyone, just the upside down car and the chiming from the open door. I went to the driver's door and stooped to look inside. After finding no one inside the car I looked down and there was someone's bloodied head sticking out from under the car directly between my feet. The shock is what woke me up. When I awoke it was about midnight. The dream was so vivid I couldn't go back to sleep so I decided I might as well start heading to Vegas. After looking at the map I realized that I could either go back to San Jose and stay on the interstates, longer drive, or go south on 1 and cut across the Sierras to I-5 on a small 2-lane road, shorter drive, so I went south. As I started driving up the canyon it got darker and quieter, no traffic at all. When I came around a bend there was a Toyota Corolla upside down in the middle of the road. Headlights still on and all four doors wide open. My first thought was Fido this shit, fuck it, drive on, but I stopped on the shoulder to see if anyone needed help. So I'm on I-85 coming north out of Atlanta just above downtown just before the Peachtree Street Bridge. It's late at night and pouring rain. There are flashing lights up ahead and traffic is heavy but it's moving. I come up on a single car accident. Tons of police and emergency vehicles. Just then a cop points to me and stops all traffic in all lanes and I am on the front row. There is a car sitting sideways in the center lane and has already been attached to a wrecker but not lifted. All the emergency personnel are staring at the car. There is a police photographer taking flash pictures. So you can't see why this is a big deal. And you can only see anything as the flash goes off on his camera. As the wrecker driver begins to lift the car, the photographer flashes away. As the car rises something large begins to slide off the front driver's side well out of the wheel well. I am staring too, trying to see what he is photographing. Then flash, a woman's bloody body flops onto the wet asphalt. Then darkness and flash there she is again. It was horrific. Her clothes were shredded and she was covered in blood and road grime. Flash, darkness, flash, darkness. Could not have been more freaky if it had been scripted for a movie. To this day, I don't know where she came from. Pedestrian? Jumper? Passenger? No one deserves to go out like that. Then a cop waves me on and off I go, with the unimaginable sight still flashing in my mind. I have a story that still confuses me to this day. It was about mid-November a few years back and I was traveling down the interstate pretty late at night, about 2 a.m. I was getting hungry and pretty tired, so I radioed him that I was setting up camp at the next truck stop. Thankfully up here there are a few truck stops that have diners, but I seemed to miss the ticket on this one as it wasn't a nice diner. It was pretty run down and seemed like it was in a bit of disrepair. But whatever I tell myself, I'm hungry and I'm only going to be sleeping in the cab for a few hours. I'll just lock the doors and keep my wrench close. Plus the ambient sounds of the area were nice. It was on a lake, so the fresh air was nice. When I walked into the diner, I was hit with a bad stench. It kind of smelled like bad fish. Given that this area seems like the place to house lot lizards, hookers at truck stops, I didn't think too much of the unpleasant odor. I sat down at the diner bar near the register. The waitress was very odd. She had a strange, almost twitchy personality. Eyes shifting a lot like she was afraid or hiding something, but I shrugged it off. I ordered breakfast and coffee and in about 10 minutes my food was up. The food was bad, really bad, and had a seafood-like taste. I was completely disgusted as I demanded that they either remake the food or I'm not paying. The waitress went back and spoke to her manager. He came out and apologized and had the food remade. She brought the food out and it was passable this time. Not pleasant, but I was hungry. She told me that she comped the bill, and when I asked how much, she got really weird and shaky. That's when she said it. It'll be about $3.50. Well, it was about this time I noticed that this waitress was about 8 stories tall and was a crustacean from the Proterozoic era. I noped out of there so quick, shouting, "You ain't gonna get $3.50 from me, monster," before she started hissing and chasing after me. Luckily I got back into my truck in time and peeled out of there. In short, don't go to truck stop diners. I'm not a trucker, but I do a lot of late night drives throughout the week. The absolutely creepiest thing I've ever seen is this massive, electric white blob gently floating in the air and shooting straight down at my windshield. It was ball lightning. I had a passenger with me, and we actually ducked out of the way because it was heading from really high straight down and looked like it would go through our windshield. I think it may have bounced off my roof, but no burn marks, so it must have just missed us. Picture the ghost from the original Ghostbusters movie in the 80s running at the lady in the library, and that's sort of what it was like. 100% unexpected and unavoidable. Stuck out in the night like a beacon of evil. Had I been unfamiliar with the concept of ball lightning, St. Elmo's fire, etc. from coast to coast AM, we would have totally believed it was an alien. The weirdest, most unique and uncanny experience I've ever had. Obligatory, my brother-in-law, not me. But about 2 weeks ago he passed a car pulled over and parked all kinds of janky in the mountains and started to slow down just to be cautious. Just as he was coming up on a huge cliff on the right, his headlights lit up a dude dragging a screaming woman by the hair on the side of the road. The dude looked him dead in the eyes, pulled the girl up, then pushed her hard into the path of his truck, then took off heading back towards the strangely parked car. He had already slowed considerably since he saw the car, so he slammed on his brakes and stopped just in time, 5 feet in front of the woman laying in the middle of the road, then jumped out to check on her. She kept saying she didn't know the guy and I just asked him for a ride after and wouldn't elaborate as to what after was referring to, so we're assuming hooker/stripper. She wanted my bill to just give her a ride, but he said that's a terrible idea and called the cops and waited with her. Pretty crazy, but the cool thing is his boss gave him a pass on being like 2 hours late for deliveries, which was cool. I'm not a trucker, but once when I was driving from Texas to California, in the middle of nowhere, up ahead I saw flames. As I got closer there was a car in the middle of the road on fire. Normally this wouldn't be very creepy. Except for the fact that I was in the middle of the desert and had been driving for hours through it. There was no one and nothing around for miles and miles. I was in the middle of a wasteland. I got out of course to check and see if someone was in the car. No dice. Then I thought I heard something in the trunk. A couple of banging sounds. Of course it could have been something in the trunk maybe exploding. But I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe someone was in it. The fire was way too hot for me to get in there and try to open it. Whipped out my phone to try to call 911, had no signal. At that point it occurred to me that I may have just stumbled across a murder. That the person who did this might be watching. So I got the fuck out of there. As soon as I had a signal I called the police and told them everything that I saw. A few hours later they called me back to confirm the area that I was in. They didn't find shit. So yeah. That's my creepy story. Not a trucker, but I was a freight broker and a dispatcher for a while. I used to work second shift and would field calls after hours. One driver called me once at night worried he was being followed. He was hauling alcohol and was worried that he would be robbed. I stayed on the phone with him while we worked out where he was using Mike marked on the freeway he was on in Idaho. The car would randomly speed up and go around him, then stop on the shoulder and wait for him to pass and follow him for 30 minutes and do it again. Well, the driver almost ran out of hours and pulled over to the next truck stop. When he pulled in, we stayed on the phone with him while he got his spot. The car stopped in front of his truck in the truck parking lot and stayed there. We were able to get a local sheriff's department to go to the lot. It took them 4 hours. The driver locked his truck up and secured the doors and a ratchet strap and covered the front window up and went bed. When I came back to work the next day, I was told the sheriff showed up and the car was still there, but it was left abandoned. There is footage of the occupant going to the gas station and then walking down the highway. I wasn't with the driver, but I'm still freaked out. I drive a lot, but mostly during the day. I have about 400,000 miles on the road just in the last 10 years. Anyway, the creepiest things I've seen have all been driving up on accidents where you know someone's died. There are plenty of people all around with their phones out, but no emergency crew is there yet. Nothing you can do except keep moving and not make a spectacle of things. Some odd things I've seen have been hitchhikers on rarely traveled country roads, dogs covered in blood dragging dead wildlife around, and just wildlife in general doing crazy shit, like a couple of raccoons doing the nasty in the middle of the road. Scariest moments have all been driving in shitty conditions, not being able to see the road and wondering if I was going to make it home at all. The times you're on the road and it's late at night or early morning and you don't see anyone for miles. I like those, it feels peaceful. I've seen a lot of great sunsets and sunrises too, probably more than most. I wish I could share those with people, but you just gotta be there. My dad was a truck driver for many, many years. We live in central Kansas, and while some weird shit happens here, like strangers walking into town during whiteout blizzards, all kinds of UFO sightings which most attribute to secret military stuff from Fort Riley, and strange animal sightings like black cats the size of German shepherds and they have long white tufts of hair sticking up from ears like a lynx. Living here, you just expect to hear about this kind of stuff. What you don't expect to hear about is something another truck driver told my dad and I one day while we were at our shop working on Dad's truck. The trucker said he was near the I-70, I-135 interchange just north of Salina, Kansas, when he saw a completely hairless 7-foot-tall man, white as snow, wearing a silver robe with gold trim and gold symbols on the long sleeves. He was holding 3 leashes, and at the end of each leash was a completely nude human child on all fours. There they were, just on the edge of the road, and the tall man holding up one thumb from an outstretched arm, but no motion or movement from the man or the 3 naked kids on leashes. When he was done telling his fantastical bullshit story, I was snickering at the ridiculousness of it and turned to look at my dad, but he wasn't laughing. Instead, he was pale white in the face and shaking. Dad said he saw the same thing months earlier just north of Oklahoma City and attributed it to exhaustion after having driven 18 hours straight. Creeps me out just thinking about my dad's face that day. I'm not exactly what you'd call a truck driver, but my uncle used to have a small fleet, and sometimes he'd pay me to recover a truck when a driver got fired or quit in the middle of a haul. By far the creepiest thing that ever happened to me was when I recovered a truck outside of Detroit. The driver tried to buy crank from an undercover cop and was fired, and my uncle flew me up there to deliver the load and deadhead back to Chicago. Anyways, it's pretty late when I get in, and even later when I get to the truck stop the rig is parked at, so after I called my uncle to let him know I was on site and the cargo was secure and made sure everything was in working order, I figured I'd catch some sleep and head out first thing in the morning. As soon as I get settled into the rack, I hear this tap 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 on the driver's side window, so I unnest the bunk and slide into the seat, where I found myself face to face with this beat up looking black lady. She goes, "You look in for some company?" Now, I've never had the dubious pleasure of spending some quality time with a lizard before, and I wasn't about to start now. But I had dealt with them before, and frequently a no, thanks doesn't get the point across. So I'm all no. Get your ass off my truck and leave me alone. She looks me dead in the eye and says, "Honey, I ain't on your truck," and the turn to walk away. Sure enough, she hadn't been standing on my truck, she was just like 7 feet tall and wearing platforms. I bitch towed an 80 through Kansas with an outrigger sidearm barely hanging onto tap cordons forthright. When I pulled into the Catskill rest stop, I found a pair of dismembered breasts in a stall, draped over the toilet. I backed up and did a wide, comic sidestep to use the next stall over. Pissed like a racehorse that evening. Got the f*** out of there. Not a trucker but a former dispatcher and administrative worker for a large trucking company. These might seem less creepy to you as I have not been there in person, but as somebody who has seen pictures of the aftermath and remembering these pictures and the feelings I connected is a very creepy feeling. Early morning call that one of our drivers of a 88.000 pounds truck had gone sour on 3 trucks at the back of a traffic jam on a 2-lane autobahn at full speed, hit with so much force he got catapulted out of the cockpit while still being strapped in the driver's seat, landed quite comfortable for that situation on the back right on the road. I was shocked and afraid for his life as nothing, absolutely nothing, pointed to him making it. Dude came out of the hospital 4 months later with a distinct limp he couldn't shake, walked past my office and I couldn't believe he was that physically well. No other people were harmed apart from me, I had to do the insurance work. Imagining him laying there on the tarmac, the unconscious, heavily damaged body of a guy I knew personally and liked by all, illuminated by the lights of cars and trucks in the early morning hours, to me is creepy. 2.1 Driver didn't respond to our calls in the morning, he should have reached one checkpoint in the morning and customers were calling. At lunchtime we had traced him to a car park where he and his truck should have boarded a train the night before. He apparently had a heart attack, got out of the truck but collapsed right beside it, clutching his phone. Temperatures were below freezing and he was frozen through when discovered. Sad to think how lonely of a death that was, and it still gives me the creeps. I was humping over a triple day catching just enough dips in the sleeper to comply with paper trails. It was one of those, catching that drift somewhere outside of Barstow on the desert moments fueled with no dust, except I was closer to catching the rays of morning in Nebraska if I kept moving. The shadows started darting around the headlights and I figured I needed to stop, if only for a bit. So I decide to stop at this rest area with a little diner attached. There's like 2 or 3 other guys in here and a waitress who seems tired as hell. I sit down and ask for some coffee and waffles. The lady says, "What?" Must have been the sleep, so I raise my voice and I look at her and say coffee and waffles and she laughs a little. Sounds like a smoker. She goes to take my order. The coffee was strong and the waffles were good. I get back on the road and feel mostly better. Then right as I'm about to hightail the payload out of Kansas I see this titless woman run from a rest stop. I made it early to drop off either way and got the bonus. I had a drop-off way out in the countryside a couple of times a week. It was a farm, as isolated gets in Denmark. I'd been there many times before, and had a routine to get my goods unloaded quickly and efficiently. It was pitch black out here with no automatic lights outside. There was actually a light installed, but you'd have to walk to the other side of the building to turn on the outside lights. There was a big gate that you'd pull open and the first room was the farmer's storage room for all sorts of random shit. You pull your pallets through this room and then down a corridor and into a cold storage room a bit further down. In the very first room after opening the gate, the light switch was on the far side of the room, presumably because that's where the workers and the farmer entered in the mornings, and left in the evening. So what I would usually do was just hit the working lights on the trailer, and it would be bright enough to light up the room, at least good enough for me not to stumble on shit, and then there would be sensor-triggered lights once you got to the long corridor. This day though, something had shorted on the trailer earlier in the night, and the lights had been acting up until I pulled 2 of the fuses on the trailer. So no working lights. I remember thinking something like, fuck's sake, I'm gonna trip on some of his shit now and break something when I pulled open the gate. I started doing the I can't see shit walk through the room, with my arms and legs probing in front of me while I inched forward. I remember I got to an empty stack of pallets, easily identified by touch, and then thought that the light would be probably just a few meters to my left. Then I stumbled into something. Initially I thought it might have been old bags for produce, think burlap potato sacks. I felt around it and it became clear, this was definitely not potato sacks. I still don't know how to really describe this, it felt, shape-wise, like a torso. I'm sure I felt ribs, and softer tissue a little lower, like the stomach or just under the ribs on side. It sort of felt like skin, but it was rough and I definitely felt hair, I'm sure of it. It was ice cold to the touch. It took a second for my mind to realize what my hands was telling it, but when I felt it move, even though it was ever so slightly, I just bolted towards the door. I stumbled over shit and was in a half-and-half run/fall when I got to the truck. I yanked open the door, I got my flashlight and a hammer out of the side compartment and just stood there for what was probably a good 5 minutes. Eventually, my mind and heart calmed a little. I remember thinking that I probably fondled a strung-up deer, that the farmer had bled after hunting or something. Or that my mind had just played tricks on me in the dark, that it was something completely harmless that I'd just gotten the wrong idea. I went back around the corner, there was the pallet stack, up against the back wall, just about 2 meters from the light switch. And in between was absolutely nothing. Just a clear path with nothing but empty floor and wall. I think that's what got me most. If there had been anything there, just any random thing, I would have accepted right then and there that it had been my mind. I'm still not completely sure about the whole thing. Maybe I got turned around in the dark somehow, and I wasn't at all where I thought. But it really got to me that night. I'm sure I felt that stack of pallets, and it was so close to the switch, right up against the wall, and I know I felt hair and ribs. Just fucking creepy. Never stepped out of my truck without my flashlight up there again. Creepiest thing I ever had happened to me was in Jersey City a couple of years ago. It was just starting to snow, and there was a big blizzard coming in, expected to dump over a foot of snow on the city overnight. It's dark, around 11 or midnight I think. The streets are dead. Not a car or another person to be seen. With the snow falling, things are extremely silent. I'm about out of hours and looking for a truck stop to park at before I get stuck somewhere in the snow. I've missed a turn and gotten a little lost, and take an exit to get turned back around. I make the mistake of obeying the red traffic signal at the bottom of the ramp, and as soon as I come to a stop, there comes hurtling out of a dark alley this banshee of a crackhead woman. She climbs up on the side of my truck and is tugging on the door handle and slapping the window and yelling at me to let her in. I'm so shocked I can't do anything but stare at her in disbelief. We make eye contact. I slowly shake my head, and she's just like oh. And climbs back down. I ended up parking at a place called the Jersey Truck Stop. Got snowed in for like 48 hours. Ate my emergency can of Spam and played a lot of video. A few years back I pulled into an empty rest area up near Cadillac, Michigan around 3 a.m. It was the middle of February and there was a few inches of snow on the ground and I had to trudge a quarter mile from the truck lot to the pavilion, which is no fun. On the way back to the truck I look to my right and realize I'm not alone. In fact I'm equidistant from my truck and a bobcat the size of a large dog that's watching me intently. I instantly freeze in my tracks and it takes a few steps towards me before stopping as well. Now I have no idea what to do about a bobcat, but I figure he can definitely beat me to the truck, especially given the terrain. I don't even know if they're dangerous to humans, but I've played some Red Dead Redemption in my time and I'm not happy about the situation. I turn full face to it and start backing towards the truck, all the while waving my arms and bellowing at it, trying to drive it away. It's not very promising, because it keeps taking a few steps towards me and stopping. About this time a pair of headlights flash over the lot and a minivan pulls into the lot. Completely oblivious to the National Geographic event taking place. I start yelling as loud as I can and manage to alert the guy driving it that there's a crazy person wandering around. He starts his vehicle up again, preparing for flight, and as he backs out, his lights hit the bobcat and it takes off into the trees again. I make a run for the truck, the van drives off into the night, and thus ended probably the fourth most dangerous encounter I've had in Michigan. I hit a part of Texas on the I-10 or I-40, can't remember which, but there were no artificial lights as far as the eye could see. I pulled over, turned off the lights to my truck, and looked up at the stars and moon. Really epic scene. When I was walking back to my truck, I saw what I thought was a human-sized silhouette pass in between me and the cab of the truck. I was maybe 20 feet away, and didn't hear so much as a cricket chirp. I thought, maybe that was a bat, or a bird, or even possibly an owl. They fly silently, right? I wasn't scared then, just startled. Then as I went to take another step towards my truck it came back and stopped in between me and the door. I could see it was the size of a man by the outline against the white International ProStar I was driving. But I couldn't see it. It was just a silhouette in an otherwise brightly moonlit landscape. I could read the dot number off my truck if I had been off to the side, that's how bright it was. But this thing was just standing there, totally black. No features. I couldn't look away. I was paralyzed with fear at this point. I didn't want to move and provoke it. I didn't have my gun on me because, I stopped randomly in this empty stretch of highway. Who would be out here? After a few brief moments, I blinked, and it was gone. I crawled back into the cab of my truck, fully expecting for something to grab me from underneath it. And I drove away. I have tried to find that same stretch of road since, but there's never been a time where any part of any Texas highway has been so empty of traffic and street/city lights. I quit what it was, but either my eyes were playing tricks, or I crossed into some spirit world like in Mothman prophecies. My miles made sense at the end of the day, so shrug. My cousin David is a truck driver. He lives down in the Valley of Texas, Mission to be specific, and told me the scariest thing he's ever seen. It was last at night, like 3 in the morning he remembers, so he pulled into a rest stop to sleep. He locked the doors and was fine. 30 minutes later he says he heard laughter, but of course it's pitch black outside, being the middle of nowhere Texas. He said it sounded almost like evil villain laughing. So he turns on his headlights and a spotlight he had and saw nothing. Then he looks at the picnic area, table and benches, and a man in a trench coat is standing there laughing, but looking at his feet. Just laughing, but since he's looking down, my cousin can't see his face. This continues for like 45 seconds, then the man takes one step forward. My uncle said he left as fast as the truck would let him, and in the rear view he saw the man sprint towards the truck, but didn't see what came of him as it got darker and darker. Now I don't know if this is true, but I doubt he would lie about it, and he turns ghost white every time he tells the story. Many years ago I was on a forum. One of the members was this guy Sergey. As you could probably tell from his name, he was Russian, this grizzled old guy who had been trucking for decades. He used to tell stories of life under communism and whatnot, and some weird shit that happened while he was driving the vastness of Russia. This one story hit me so hard that I saved it. This was back in 1991, around the time the Union was dissolved. It was a strange time, periods of eerie calm and utter chaos in the space of just a few days. You'd drive past a military base one week, and the next the place would be almost gone. Vultures and jackals picking clean at the remains of a once great nation. I regret to admit that I had been involved in that, ferrying equipment from place to place for various illicit arms dealers and corrupt military officials trying to make money out of the situation. Times were hard then, and my company had to take any job it could find. I am not proud of it. One particular job involved picking up some cargo to be disposed of from a scientific institute in an area around 800 kilometers northeast of Krasnoyarsk city. It was located next to a lake. I saw massive dredging machines, boats of various sizes, and what looked like a submarine dock. I took a peek inside one of the boxes that they had laid out for me, and found many documents. From what I recall of my quick look, they were about investigating something buried at the bottom of the lake. I remember distinctly the words extraterrestrial origin and impact event. Nobody around seemed to care that I was snooping. From what I gathered from talking to others at the time, many of them weren't being paid due to the situation in Moscow, so they probably had no sense of loyalty to their superiors anymore and just wanted to do their jobs as quickly as possible. I asked one of them why these things were being disposed of, as some of the dates were quite recent, and he said that the facility administrator wanted them gone because if the UN came sniffing around now that the Union wasn't there to stop them, people there would be in deep shit. I knew what he meant. The facility had been conducting illegal experiments and they wanted the evidence destroyed. I helped the men move the various boxes and crates onto the bed of my truck, and when I asked for a form to sign I was curtly told that there was no paperwork for this job. I didn't bother asking why. Cover-ups are done off the books. I left the facility in a hurry, not wanting to stay there any longer than I had to. I'd been driving for a few hours and it had grown dark. There were some noises coming from the truck bed, but I didn't pay them much notice. The boxes weren't secured very well, so I thought something had come loose and was rattling around. I think I drove for another hour before I pulled over and decided to sleep, stopping at an empty rest area off the highway. I didn't sleep very long, because the noises became louder and more frequent. It couldn't have been something loose, because the truck was stopped. I got out and decided to investigate. Climbing up into the truck bed, there was one crate that had definitely moved from where we had put it. It was large, rectangular. I looked around it for any kind of label, but there was none, so I grabbed a crowbar and prized off the lid. What I saw inside made me drop the lid again and shout in dismay. Inside the box, wrapped in tarpaulin, was what was unmistakably a corpse. It wasn't moving. I thought to myself, Christ, these assholes have me transporting a body. All that ruckus earlier must have been the poor bastard trying to escape. I slowly moved back over to the crate, lifting the lid and taking another peek. It still wasn't moving. I called out to whoever it was, reaching down to tap the tarpaulin to see if I could get a response. It suddenly started screaming, thrashing around and banging what I guessed was its head against the side of the crate. I started trying to pull the tarpaulin off, to release what was now very obviously a living man and not a corpse. I didn't get very far. Before I knew what was happening, a mottled and disfigured looking hand had grabbed hold of my own, throwing me aside so hard that I hit my head against another crate and was knocked unconscious. I awoke to the sun hitting my face. I looked around and saw no sign of the man in the crate. I checked myself out and, apart from a painful knot on my head, I was unharmed. I climbed out, still feeling groggy and disoriented from my bout of unconsciousness. As I walked around, trying to get my head straight and wake my legs up, I noticed footprints in the dirt. I followed the trail to where it entered the forest and looked around. Several branches had been broken along a path deeper into the woods. I figured that the man had escaped from the truck and run into the trees. I quickly decided that I had best not investigate further. I went back to the truck, closed up the now empty crate, and got behind the wheel again. I made my delivery at the disposal site and drove back to the depot without stopping. Didn't happen to me directly, but my uncle was literally abducted while working as a trucker. I'll try to remember the details as best as I can. He only told me the story once, then refused to speak about it again. He worked as a trucker his entire adult life, or at least for as long as I was alive. One day he was up around Illinois or Indiana area, I think, and it was early evening. He pulled over at a truck stop for a break. He fueled up the truck, then went inside and had dinner. It was one of those with a diner type place inside, then took a shower. Point being that he was in there for a little while, till the 30 to 45 minutes. When he came out to get back in the truck, everything looked normal, but as soon as he opened the door, a guy jumped out from behind the cabin. Think he was hiding between the cabin and the trailer, and pulled a weapon. Think he said it was a gun, but might have been a knife. Guy orders my uncle to get in the cabin and climb in the back. My uncle drove one of those trucks with the sleep area / bed in the back, then the guy climbed in after. He told my uncle to lay down on the bed and put his hands behind his back. Then he took some bungee cables my uncle kept in the cabin and tied him up hands and feet. Didn't gag him, as far as I can remember. Then the guy gets in the driver's seat and just starts driving. Uncle said he had no trouble getting the truck going, so he clearly had some experience driving big rigs. From what I remember, he didn't talk to my uncle the whole time. He just drove and would occasionally look back and flash the weapon to remind my uncle that he could mess him up if he wanted. My uncle said he couldn't really see where they were, but he could tell they were on the interstate again. After a long time of driving through the night, my uncle mentioned it was probably when the fuel tank was getting low. He pulled over at another truck stop. The guy just looked back at my uncle, seemed to think about something, maybe whether or not to untie him. Then just got out, shut the door, and left. My uncle said he laid there for a while, scared he was getting fuel or food or something, then coming back, but he never did. After several more hours, another truck pulled into the spot next to him and my uncle yelled for help until the guy opened the door and found him. Pretty sure they called the police, my uncle never directly said, but I can't fathom that they wouldn't, but they never found the guy as far as my uncle knew. Turns out that he drove him to the next state over and stopped when he was at tilde 10% of a tank left, and it looks like he left on foot. Sounds like it was fortunate that no one else was fueling at that time, or he might have taken their truck too. After that, I want to say my uncle got like a month off from work to go home and spend time with his family. He actually went back to work as a trucker for a few years more, but he would never do long-haul trips anymore, and he pretty much retired the second he had enough years in. It was scary listening to that story, not only because it's messed up circumstances, but also because my uncle was a pretty tough dude and you could just see in his eyes that this thing still haunted him. He did seem extremely grateful though that the guy didn't actually hurt him. My cousin was less than 1 year old at the time and was my uncle's only kid. I guess the moral of the story is, be freaking careful, everyone. There's some messed up people in this world. My dad has been a lifetime truck driver. First a mover. Then refrigerated trailers, then freight. Where he is now, he has previously stated that he's seen some shit. Fights, overdoses, etc. So last summer he was driving somewhere in Virginia. Note that he complained to me and my mom the week before how people in Virginia drive like assholes. So anyway, he's going down the interstate and sees the flashing lights of a wrecker and a state cop pulled over to assist a broken down truck on the opposite side of the highway. My dad has always been a curious guy, so naturally he slows down 10 miles per hour or so to take a good look at the guy on the other side of the highway and what's going on. Well, then this shit happens. My dad has always told me if there's a car or any sort of vehicle broken down on the side of the road, get to the farthest lane from them, naturally to give them space to move around their vehicle if they need to inspect it for damage, etc. Well, people in Virginia drive like assholes, so they didn't. Even with flashing lights. The original truck driver who was broken down, opens his cab door, and begins to climb out of his truck. My dad said he did a little hop off the lowest stair from his truck to the highway. In that instant, this car smashes into the guy, killing him immediately. I think he processed though the car ran over him and squashed his brain, gray mattering the road. My dad had to stop and regain his composure because he felt he would pass out. Now that's across the median and on the other sides of the road. So I can only imagine how the wrecker and cop reacted. My dad never likes to talk about it. It brings him to tears thinking about it. He sent a card to the family and offered his condolences. But still to this day it fucks him up more than anything he can recall. Not a truck driver, but here's one that still haunts me. In Pittsburgh about 30 years ago. Around 10 p.m. on a cold winter evening. Trying to merge onto a very busy interstate, with all the cars going at full speed and the merge ramp very short. One car in front of me, Others behind me. I'm swiveling my head, back and forward, tense about the merge and also making sure I don't slam into the front of the car ahead of me. We were all going probably 40 miles an hour trying to merge onto a 60 miles per hour freeway. Stressful moment. The whole thing happened in about 5 seconds. My headlights catch the car in front of me perfectly and I see silhouetted in the window the driver violently swing and hit the passenger, the hit throwing the passenger against her door. The passenger door flies open and the passenger almost falls out, and I see it's a woman with long blonde hair. Her head and upper torso dipped outside the vehicle to the same level as her feet inside the vehicle, but she had her hand on the handle and managed to stay in the car. The car veers sharply right into the grass shoulder. I have to make a split-second decision. This all happened 1,2,3, and my instincts pulled me left and onto the freeway. There was nothing I could do. I had to accelerate and join the traffic. This was before cell phones. Nothing to do but keep going. I went down to the next exit, spun back around and came back. The car was gone. I just hope the car behind me stopped, although I imagine they would have still been there by the time I got back. I feel bad about it to this day. I wish I could have stopped. I was on an overnight haul from Omaha to Portland, Oregon when my engine started to overheat. Luckily, I was near a rest stop so I pulled over and called dispatch for help. About the time I got off the phone, a smallish girl in her early 20s with bright red hair starts frantically knocking on my door. I tentatively rolled down the window to see what she needed. She was obliviously upset, and it was the middle of the night, so my alarms were definitely going off. She told me that she was out of gas but had to get to Topeka tonight or her life was ruined. She promised it was life or death. Still skeptical, I asked her how much she needed. It was then she looked me directly in the eyes, opened her mouth, and in the most chilling voice I've ever heard, told me I need about $350. It was about that time that I realized that the redhead was about 8 stories tall and a crustacean from the Paleolithic era. That was a long time ago, and I since retired from trucking but will never forget her or what happened that night. Not a truck driver, I was driving over Tioga Pass in Yosemite in the middle of the night. It was absolutely pitch black, no moonlight whatsoever. The road drifted to the left and my headlights swept past a man standing completely alone in the middle of a parking lot at an overlook. This would have been early October at 9,700 of elevation. It was very cold out. He waved and my then girlfriend, now wife, said not to stop. I turned into the lot and pulled up next to him and rolled down my window. Turns out he had fallen over and slid down a granite cliff. He had managed to get back to the parking lot but was completely disorientated, freezing, and had no idea where he was relative to anything. He asked if I had seen a car. I pointed him to it. I then followed him as he walked to his car. I'm convinced he wouldn't have found his car and may have perished had I or someone else not happened to have driven by and taken the time to slow down and investigate something odd. A friend and I were off-roading on a hiking trail that we weren't particularly allowed to be driving on. We were each in our own Jeep and he was driving ahead of me. We've been on this trail before so we weren't nervous about running into anyone or getting lost until we rounded a corner and this woman ran out in front of him. She was screaming bloody murder so my friend stopped and I did the same. As we were stopped I caught the shadowy figures of 3 large men moving out of the trees on our left towards our Jeeps. I started honking my horn and waving my arm out the window of my Jeep like mad hoping my friend would notice. After a few seconds I decided that the woman was probably in on it and figured even if I hit the woman, I had to get up and around my friend and he would probably follow. Just as I started to pull around the driver's side of his Jeep he noticed the men approaching our vehicles and stomped on the gas. The worst part of this is that we couldn't tell the police because we would have received a pretty severe punishment for driving on game lands. Combine that with the fact that people are expected to be walking back where we were. If we were on foot we would have been killed or worse. We had to drive back the same road to get out and didn't see them when we left. Hopefully they just ran off and didn't wait around for anyone to show up on foot. Maybe too late to the party. Not a trucker. We were traveling from Tucson to El Paso, on the I-10. This happened in 2009, if that matters. We had gone to Tucson to watch an Opeth concert, so we were going back on a Sunday night because we had to work next day. Anyway, we're driving in the evening, with some moderate traffic. Nobody's talking, everyone was tired and kinda hangovered, when suddenly we all see a well-dressed, attractive woman, with a purse and heels walking on the side of the road. She is walking towards our direction. We just pass her and that's it. We don't see anything else, it's just her, she didn't even ask for a ride or anything, she's just walking and that's it. So my buddies start saying, hey, that was weird. Who walks on a Sunday night with heels in the middle of nowhere? Anyway, We drive a few more miles and we pass some patrols, an ambulance and a car in flames. We start feeling very uncomfortable. We don't see any bodies or personal items, or whatever, just a car in flames. I decided not to investigate anything, but one of my buddies does. Apparently a young woman died on the crash we saw. Not sure how to feel about it, but it gave me the creeps. Well, it still does. Was hauling a load from California to Michigan once and my GPS said the trip would be 2 hours quicker if I took US 50 instead of I-80. I soon learned this was the loneliest road in America. No services or anything at all for hundreds of miles. At 02:00 in the morning I was too tired to keep driving and had to stop on a large shoulder for the night. I was still 200 miles from any services and was thoroughly nervous that night because I've heard stories of truckers getting killed while parked in an isolated area overnight. It was also pitch black out there and I could hear coyotes while taking a piss. Luckily I was undisturbed and continued my trip in the morning. Something else is singing trailers. When I was new to trucking there was a quiet night while I was in my truck bed and I kept hearing an unusual and consistent creaking sound. Upon inspection it was the trailer airlines making dull noises. Still can't figure out why they do this, and when they do it, it lasts for hours. Another thing. Was driving on I-10 at night and was around Arizona/California. There was a sandstorm at the time and at times the road would just disappear for like a mile because it was covered in sand. I was lucky because there were a bunch of guys with ATVs driving around and along the road so I didn't lose my way. I once saw a motorcyclist in the middle of the night fall asleep at the wheel, I think. I was headed north and he was headed south on a major but empty highway. His lane of traffic was elevated above mine by about 75 feet or so and there was a large divide between the lanes. There was a slight curve at that point in the road and he didn't take it. He just kept going straight, and sort of disappeared in my rear view mirror with the headlamp making me think it flipped end over end. I called it in on the radio but half of me wondered if I imagined it all. Another time I was taking a country road in the middle of nowhere by a river in an agricultural area. It was pitch black in the middle of the night. An owl flew in front of me then turned in the direction I was headed. He didn't make it and was hit by my window. He rolled to the side and became caught in the driver's side rear view mirror, and he was basically just stuck there a foot or so from my head staring at me as he died, with a slow drip of blood from his beak. I was beyond freaked out and he didn't fall off for a few miles.